Chapter 21. After the initial conquest, Tashinde left the Yautja to circle the Uman dwellings and to get a feel for where the others might be. There were many in the same structure as the first group, but he wanted to be certain that there weren't more, perhaps waiting to ambush them. He walked, and heard the sound of machinery behind him, coming closer. Tashinde blended with the shadows, as they had all been taught, and waited to see what would come. He patted the mesh sack on his belt. There were already 3 Uman trophies in it, and there would be more. A single Uman drove a small aircraft into view, landed it, and then ran to one of the dwellings, a short burner in its hand. Tashinde pressed the loop control on his shift suit, one that he had salvaged from the wreck, to record the language spoken. The tiny Uman shouted, and then entered the building at the beck of another Uman inside. A short span passed, and the flyer Uman came out and went away. He thought that it was the same one. They all looked much alike to him. Tashinde waited a few breaths, and then walked to the same door from which the creature had come. He pushed the loop control on his arm of his suit, and listened to the odd language spilled from the copier. There was movement inside, and the door opened to reveal a lone Uman, defenseless. The creature's face distorted in reaction, and it howled. Tashinde ran forward and screamed for blood. The Uman stumbled back, turned, and ran for a table with a strange burner on it. Tashinde raised his bladed staff high, ready for the final cut. And there was something familiar here, a scent he knew, but it didn't matter, because the Uman must die. The Uman raised the burner slowly and fired at nothing, the shot far and wide. Then another, and Tashinde brought the blade down, prowess and certainty in the fatal cut. Noguchi heard a shot, then another. It came from the lab or somewhere near it. She had stopped at the main control hatch for the front 6 buildings of the compound and studied the numbers, not certain of the proper codes for what she needed to do. She'd punched buttons. Pretty sure that she had gotten it right, and checked her chronograph. The shots made her jump. They were accompanied by a shrill and primal scream. Noguchi jumped on the bike, turned it back towards the lab, and hoped she would get there in time. Tashinde opened his eyes at the sound of the Yautja death cry, and growled softly. Tashinde. And he pursued the creature, the Uman whose smell had become so familiar. The desperate Uman ran to the table in front of Tashinde's resting place and snatched at a burner clumsily. Tashinde towered over it in a classical pose, ready to deliver the death blow to the panicked Uman. The Uman who had nurtured him through the dark, what could have been his final moments until Dikkede. Tashinde lifted one of his arms. The strap holding it snapped. He thrust his talon forward and caught the staff right below the blade. Tashinde's head jerked up in surprise. The Uman fell to the ground. With a quick shove, Tashinde rammed the staff upward and knocked Tashinde backward. Tashinde jumped up and popped his wrist forward, extended the double-bladed kasitipa towards Tashinde. The leader growled in fury. Tashinde would raise a weapon against him. Had he lost his memory? Tashinde freed his other arm easily and tried to leap. His lower body was still bound. Tashinde jumped to meet him. Kasatipa raised a slash, and the world exploded into a million flying pieces. The sounds of battle were unmistakable, and so was Miriam Revna's scream. Noguchi stamped the pedal and ducked. Miriam cried out and fell to the floor as the wall cracked open in a roar of thunder and shattered around her. A chunk of something sharp and heavy gouged her right calf. The pain was horrible. The terror was worse. The thunder ceased. Miriam pulled herself around a table leg and turned to see what had happened. Noguchi had come through the wall. The bike was turned on its side and Machiko was propped on her elbows, pistol aimed behind Miriam. The doctor snapped her head around and saw that the attacking creature was sprawled face down on the floor. It didn't move, but she could hear its laboured breathing. The patient was still on the exam table, pinned there by one remaining bond across its abdomen. He fumbled with the strap frantically. "Lay down flat, Miriam!" Noguchi had her gun pointed at the struggling patient. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The doctor stood up, right in the line of fire. "Jesus, get down!" Noguchi's heart pounded. Miriam didn't even look back at her. She held both of her hands up and walked slowly towards the tethered warrior. The Shunde redoubled his futile attempts at freedom as the Ooman came at him. The creature held its odd, clawless hands open and moved slowly. The other, dressed as a warrior, had a weapon on him, but the approaching Ooman blocked the small warrior's efforts. It could be a trick, a ploy to calm him before the soft meat ripped him open. But the slow-moving creature was the one that had tended to him. The Kasatipa was unmistakable. If it had wanted him dead, wouldn't it have struck when he was injured and unaware? There was a thick bandage of some kind around his chest, not the work of a hunter. A healer, then. The Shunde stopped his labours and held still, but kept his body tensed and ready. He hissed a warning to the Ooman, and it leaned towards him, very slowly, and unlatched the restraint. Miriam unhooked the bond and stepped back, careful not to move suddenly. The creature had growled at her, a foreboding gurgling sound, but didn't attack when she was in reach. "What are you doing?" Miriam kept her eyes on the patient. "I think it's okay," she said softly. The creature studied her for several long seconds. Miriam held still, not wanting to frighten it. "Are you insane?" Noguchi was furious. "They killed Hiroki and 6 others." She didn't move. They did. He didn't. Miriam was scared, in spite of her intuitive feeling that the creature wouldn't harm her. Intuition wasn't a lot in the face of death. The patient moved fast. It slammed one clawed hand down on her shoulder. The Shunde inspected the Ooman thoughtfully. This was what he had wanted to hunt all of his life. It was ugly, but certainly not dangerous looking. It was stupid too. Approaching a warrior with no weapon didn't indicate a particularly high intelligence. Or it was incredibly brave and ready to do battle. Small as it was, if it wanted to fight, perhaps it was also mad. The armed one babbled at the Ooman next to him. The Shunde got the impression that the defenseless creature had kept him from being killed. The Ooman with the handheld burner lowered the weapon slowly. Overcoming a lifetime of Yautja law was not a thing he wanted to do, but good warriors stayed open to new information. Perhaps the soft meat of this world were different. The Shunde decided. He placed one of his claws on the Ooman's shoulder and shook, the symbol of greeting. The Ooman shrank slightly, and the other raised its weapon again. The Shunde took his claw away and waited. After a pause, the tiny Ooman stretched itself high and returned the gesture. The Shunde tilted his head at her. Fascinating. Then it was that the Shunde clattered his mandibles and slowly got to his feet. The Shunde's anger flared. The Sayuite! He would die. The Shunde jumped past the Ooman and whacked Tashinde's skull. The blow knocked the student to the ground. Tashinde said nothing, but scrambled at the pouch on his belt. The Shunde snatched the sack from the idiot Yautja and held it up. Trophies. Ooman trophies. His rage was blinding. Tashinde had hunted with no supervision, and had hunted Ooman. The Shunde lifted the Yautja by his tresses, the fury boosting his strength. He could smell his own musk, hot and heavy, with the desire to kill. He raised one fist and smashed Tashinde in the mouth. Tashinde tried to pull away, responded with a weak blow to Tashinde's gut. The Shunde howled in his face, a shriek of pure disgust and outrage. He struck again. Tashinde was his student, once. He had broken the rules of the hunt. There was only so much slack Tashinde could give him, even as a leader. Now the rope must be pulled taut. Now Tashinde must be destroyed. It was the law. It was a matter of honor.